Good evening, everybody. City of Missoula. We're here tonight with Jim McGrath here on my left, City Council member from Ward 2, and Anita Anderson from Montana People's Action. She is the state chair, or
vice chair
from Montana People's Action. And one of the reasons we're putting on this program tonight is we want to talk about the recently passed resolution by the City Council on our living wage. And one of the things that we want to do right now is come out and congratulate this man sitting right here next to me, Jim McGrath, on putting this through, working very hard on this, okay? So can the crew members come on out here and give Mr. McGrath a big Valentine cheer, okay? Here's our crew members from woohoo! Okay, this is centered to the left, everyone. Okay, centered to the left, and my fellow crew members wouldn't identify themselves, but they'll have their turn up here at the camera. Okay, so cheers.
That was sneaky.
That was sneaky, but it's Valentine's, and you deserve it. You deserve it. So let's get on with tonight's program. Jim, can you tell us exactly what the resolution says?
I was told this wasn't going to be live, and I didn't know I was going to get a
Well, you
Valentine's.
can paraphrase for us, can't you?
Essentially, what the resolution says is that it's an intention of the council to move forward on the whole living wage issue and define it. But what we said was, we think as a city, when we invest public money in the form of a tax incentive or other kinds of subsidy in a job creation program, if we're trying to create jobs in the community, we don't want to create poverty level jobs. And I think you said that quite clearly in your testimony. Why would we be wanting to sponsor and nurture a job that was at a low wage? So essentially what we said was, let's not do that. And then we said, let's charge ourselves to be specific about how we don't do that. How we, what wage should we do it at? What circumstances? What companies might be excused from that under certain circumstances? That kind of thing. We didn't want to hammer out those details. We wanted to and made a statement of values about value for value.
Right. Some of the city council members didn't feel as though city council should be involved in job creation. How do you feel? Obviously, you feel a little bit differently about that, but what was that argument going on there?
Well, I guess there's an ongoing and in some respects legitimate discussion about what the role of the city should be. I mean, should we just put out fires and pave roads and whatnot? To me, the health and welfare of the community is fairly substantial. And when you look at something like the fact that 2/3 of the jobs created in our community are below poverty level, and that most of the folks in our community can't afford the home that they're inhabiting, I think we've got a serious thing we have to address, and I think we need to do that.
And you and I disagree just slightly here on the fact that I think that we will continue to subsidize businesses. I think businesses are constantly pressuring government from some sort, from one side or the other, whether it be in the form of tax incentives, whether it be in the form of contracts even that I want. Let's just say I was a contractor. These things are going to happen.
Well,
and I've heard mention in the city council that they don't see that this is going to continue to happen. And
well,
I don't want to go that far on the business point of this, but business people are going to push the button.
I think there's very few council members who oppose the living wage on that basis. I think most of the people that oppose the living wage believe in subsidizing business, quite frankly. But I don't think we agree on the fact of the matter. I think the fact of the matter is that city will be asked to and submit to subsidizing business in a number of ways. I think that in a number of cases it's unwise for the city to hand out cash to a business. I mean, we wouldn't do it to you. You wouldn't, to Anita, we would just say, oh, yeah, you need a helping hand? Sure, we'll give you some cash, That's suddenly, somehow been demeaned in our public, but if a business comes in with their hands open, we seem to want to give them money. But we will be doing various and sundry things to help out in the economy and help businesses out, and I think the most important thing we've done with this measure is make the statement that we have to put some rules on that.
Right. We have a value statement now for the city of Missoula, and if you are you coming to us to ask us for some funds? And it's a broad statement, we all know now, and we've got an awful lot of work to do to get that narrowed down. But it's a value statement that says we here in Missoula want you to give back to the people something in the form of higher wages. Okay.
Absolutely.
So, how long have you been working on this resolution? A long time, huh? What did we start about? I went to Boston in May for the very first Living Wage Coalition, National Coalition, and we had some dialogue prior to that.
It was almost a year to the date. I remember meeting up at Andy Gardner's house in February of last year. But I think the discussion in our community has gone back farther than that. A former council member, Craig Sweet, brought up the matter and a couple of years ago, and I think it's something that we've talked about in our community for a while, because the problem has been there for a while.
Yeah.
We've understood the need for this.
And we have some figures later on to show on the teleprompter about the housing situation too, and that's another subject, but this is the start to try to get something going here. There is a clause in this living wage resolution about accountability. Do you have any plans on how we implement this accountability? In other words, businesses in the past have been given incentives and we haven't really kept track very well.
I mean, one of my big arguments with the current tax incentive program is that by state law it makes accountability difficult. I think anything that we engage in the future should have accountability loops in there, some ability to claw back money to say if you promise something and you don't follow through on it, you've got to account for that.
Do you have any idea how we're going to do this?
Well, actually, it isn't really that difficult or magical. Any contract will have that. You'll say in a contract, you'll say, your responsibility is X, and my responsibility is Y.
Well, there'll be penalties written into contracts.
That's
Okay,
right.
great.
So it's just a matter of.
I know a lot of people wonder about that.
Instead of engaging in economic development as a gift-giving program where we say, oh gosh, here's a business, here's some money, we say, no, this is a contract. We're investing in this business because we want to make a community investment in higher wage jobs. And investment is very clear.
Okay. Do you think that we have some public testimony to show you all from the city council meeting the other night? That's our next clip. And we're going to also be showing you some Living Wage Coalition members. Do you think that we've helped?
Oh.
I mean, I know this is a leading question, but I think we need some kudos here.
Well, I think you deserve some kudos, and I've been trying to give them over time.
Well, I know.
And to me, last Monday night was your night. I mean, it was about the people.
It was amazing. There were so many people in that city council.
There were so many people. The testimony was so excellent. It was all about the people coming forward. This was a case where the people came forward and said, this is what we need to do.
Right.
And as an elected official, we were able to respond to that. I mean, it's totally about the coalition. I've never seen anything, frankly, in my years.
Well, they had to roll back the curtains to get the second room open for everybody. From all
Even
the
though we
public
were called
testimony.
activists, I don't
Okay, are we
consider
just
that a
about
dirty
ready
word.
to cue that up then?
Not at all.
Okay. Should we go ahead and show some of those?
Good evening.
here we
My
are.
name is Bryony Schwan, and I reside at 3744 Rattlesnake Drive. I'm
Billy,
the
you could
director
turn
of a
that up
small nonprofit here in Missoula, and one of the arguments of opposition to this living wage resolution has been the fact that nonprofit organizations could not afford to pay their staff a living wage. As a founder and a director of a nonprofit, such a nonprofit that contributes around $130,000 to this community every year and that employs 4 people, I am here to tell you that that's simply not true. All of our staff earn a living wage. In fact, no one on our staff earns less than $10 an hour, and we also pay medical benefits. I have never seen a proposal to a foundation or an individual for funding ever be turned down because we pay too much money. In fact, we're more likely to be turned down because we don't pay enough money, and the concern is that if you don't pay your employees enough money, your organization will not be sustainable, nor will the work that you do. I support this resolution because I think it's critically important. As I've been a small business owner, and I've managed a small business, and now as managing a small nonprofit, I believe if we can't hire people and pay them a living wage, we don't deserve to employ those people, because I don't think it's fair for us to employ someone and then put the responsibility on this community through their taxpayers to be able to subsidize the rest of their living. And I also believe that by giving tax subsidies or any kind of subsidy to a company and not requiring them to pay a living wage is giving them a double subsidy. So as a small nonprofit manager, I encourage you to move forward on this resolution. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Gary Brown. I live at 520 Dearborn here in Missoula. I am a member of Missoula MACCAN. MACCAN is the Montana Association of Churches Christian Advocates Network. It seems to me that this living wage issue is a taxpayer fairness issue. In my mind, if we asking a business or allowing a business to come in and we subsidize either through taxes or other considerations, what we're doing is, and this company or this business doesn't pay a fair wage, what's happening is the taxpayer has to make up the difference in the taxes and increase taxes for the local taxpayer. Secondly, if there is not a living wage, then when folks who are not making a living wage have to have food stamps, etc., we as taxpayers again are paying the bill. So to me, it is a taxpayer fairness bill. So therefore, MACCAN supports the living wage proposition, and that's what I have to say.
Thank you, Mr. Brown.
My name's Janet Scott, and I live at 745 South 4th West. What I have to say relates pretty closely to what Bryony said. My take on the ordinance is that I just can't understand how anybody could oppose something to put some restrictions on double dipping. As I see it, businesses that get city handouts while paying their employees so little that they have to rely on public welfare to survive are getting subsidized twice. I think the context of the current interest in living wage ordinances is important. Let's look at some facts. The gap in pay between corporate top officers and factory workers has widened dramatically. In 1997, the average CEO made 326 times what factory workers did. 1 year earlier, it was only 209 times as much. In 1980, CEOs made only 42 times as much as factory workers. And this doesn't include the enormous extras of stock options and things like that. Even in 1980, the discrepancy far exceeded what was acceptable in the days of what we like to call the robber barons. J.P. Morgan said that the proper ratio between the top and the rank and file should be 20-fold after taxes, because beyond that you create social tension. And that notorious socialist Henry Ford held to the principle that wages paid to his workers have to be sufficient to allow them to buy his product. Closer to home, we saw Pegasus shelling out big bonuses to its top executives while they were laying off workers and shutting down operations. In the early 1950s, corporations contributed over 30% of all taxes. By the 1990s, that was only 10%. Interestingly, the number of Americans who reported that they were happy peaked in 1957 and has declined ever since. How can you look your constituents in the face or yourself in the mirror if you oppose this tiny attempt to reverse such a disastrous and unfair trend? If a company that applies for city assistance truly cannot meet the living wage standard, you might let it demonstrate that its highest paid person makes no more than, say, 5 or 10 times what the lowest paid person does. And if that really is the case, maybe waive that standard for a year. But don't take money, tax money, from citizens who are struggling to survive and use it for welfare for the wealthy. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, my name is Doug Campbell. I've been a resident of Missoula for over 60 years. I worked almost a half century as a wage earner in Missoula, and most of that time as a card-carrying union member. We seniors certainly know the importance of a decent wage. We've been through good times and bad, and we know how important that is. That is probably why at our convention last November, we unanimously passed a resolution asking for the state to set an increase in the minimum wage above the federal level. I also believe that it's the duty of local government to help wherever they can for an increase in the wages for those people. And I see this resolution as a small way of beginning that process. I think this would set an example for the business community. And while this is not the answer to all the wage problems, I think it would be a start. I also think that whenever taxpayers' money is used to subsidize or help businesses, that there should be a return of some kind to the community. And this would be a way to make that return. And also in some cases to ensure that when jobs are subsidized or businesses are subsidized, that they would not be able to up and move at the whim of the employer, that there would have to be some way of keeping those jobs in the community. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Campbell.
My name's Ryan Kelly. I live at 139 South 5th Street East. And I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to give testimony on the resolution. I'd specifically like to address my testimony to the union neutrality clause in the resolution. As a member of the Hotel and Restaurant Employees Union, I have some experience learning about organizing drives and such. And we found that the NLRA, the National Labor Relations Act, and the National Labor Relations Board do not go far enough. And if you'll see in the charts, they've gotten all the way around. That here in Montana, through the first 6 months of this year, there have been 126 charges filed against Montana employers, only 11 charges filed against the unions. And of those charges in recent years, the percentage has been going up and up and up and up of charges filed alleging retaliation against workers. And when we speak of retaliation, we're talking that the board does not adequately protect employer retaliation, including termination, threats, intimidation, coercion, harassment, bribing workers, or making false promises to the employees. And here in Montana, the NLRB has found Grouse Mountain Lodge violating workers' rights in 14 instances, Lantis Enterprises violating rights in 15 of 25 charges filed, with several still pending, Columbia Falls Super 8 violating rights in 3 of 3 charges filed, and the Medicine Tree Clinic workers in St. Ignatius voted for union representation, only to have their jobs subcontracted out during the bargaining process. No, the NLRB does not go far enough. What do we call Montana? The best place and last? We're 50th in wages. Union workers make 34% more than their non-union counterparts nationally. Here in Missoula, we have a chance to say we believe the state of wages is wrong. We have a chance to say that we respect workers' rights to organize free of harassment, empty threats, empty promises, and coercion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Quick question, do you want to wait till the end, or what?
Yes. Further public comment?
Could you be more clear about that, Mike? Just kidding.
I'm Kimberly Eisentrager. I'm on the Missoula District Board for Montana People's Action. I was going to chiefly present some statistics on the state of the Montana economy and how it's affecting people and families here in Missoula. And the cold hard facts are cold and hard enough. For example, the fact that Montana has the fastest growing poverty rate in the nation, that we have more people in Montana working 2 or more jobs to make ends meet than any other state, the fact that we have the lowest average annual income in the state, in the nation. Those facts are alarming enough, but I know it's the personal stories that always affect listeners the most. And in the process of this living wage campaign, I've heard dozens of stories of the impact on families of inadequate income, how people have been forced to move out of the state just to be able to make ends meet and support their families. Until now, I've never had a personal story to tell. Part of being from a middle-class background includes feeling that, in fact, it never will happen to you. But in the autumn, I'm going to be moving away from Missoula. I'm moving to Boston, Massachusetts. I simply cannot afford to live in Missoula as a young single person. But I know that entire families are being expected to live on minimum wage here. People who can't make the rent, who have to choose between food and heat. This will be the 12th move and the 24th home that I will have lived in my life. And although I'm accustomed to moving and traveling has been the great joy of my life, I've spent 7.5 years here in Missoula, and I expected to spend the rest of my life here. I expected to buy a home here and to start a family, but in fact that won't be possible, as with so many other families that could have been great contributors to this community. I'm going to have to leave. This is something I never expected to happen, and I know so many other people never expected it to happen. The city I'm moving to, Boston, Massachusetts, is among the 19 other cities in the nation that have passed a living wage ordinance. And while it's a great privilege to have worked on this campaign and to be moving to one of those 19 cities, I'd also like to be able to say that I lived in number 20, Missoula, Montana. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name's Scott Moffett, North 112 Patty Street, and I've had the opportunity to attend a handful of economic development meetings, and there were times that it became pretty tedious over the wording and such. For example, the good economic citizen wording to exemplary citizen. And I guess what I'd like to see is this city council become exemplary city council members to go ahead and pass this resolution. It's time to move this. It's been over a year that we've been talking about it. I just feel it's time now to move. Thanks.
Thank you. Further public comment?
Okay, that was just a small part of the number of people that showed up to give testimony at the city council meeting the other night. We did not spend enough time on the union's position and the report that was given to us by the union person, where he pointed out that there had been many, many violations against, well, go ahead, you talk about, it was actually an impromptu report he gave to the city council at that time.
And that was real important. I mean, what he gave us that night was new information that we hadn't actually had, but a number of us were informed, and I think all of us should have been cognizant. The sad thing was that in committee discussion that week, Jack Reedy, who is a lifelong union member and so on, was promoting language, not the same that we looked at Monday night, but eliminating union, the no union busting language essentially, and saying, sort of in the name of the labor union, and I really confronted him with him because, it's one thing to say, well, high wages are established by workers being able to organize and create unions, which I think is certainly the case. But it's another to ignore the situation that we have today where companies consistently refuse to obey the law, flagrantly violate labor laws, and that the labor laws themselves are essentially toothless. And so we need to be making a statement about that,
And
I
that's
think,
part
in our
of the
public posture.
And isn't that a part of the resolution too, that there is that right?
The part of, absolutely. We
Right.
have two important components to that. One is that you have to have what we initially called a clean record with the National Labor Relations Board, which is saying you don't have a history of busting unions. And the other is that you're willing to sign what are called neutrality agreements, which say that if your workers come together and say they want to organize a union, you will not go out of your way to discourage that. And although that happens time and time again, illegally and unfairly, we don't think public money should sponsor that sort of behavior.
I want to bring up the fact that the word ordinance actually came out many times in the citizens' testimony. Do you think that this will become an ordinance?
Well,
or that it has to be an ordinance?
Well, I don't think it has to be an ordinance. I think that's something that in our further discussion we'll determine. We have to put it in policy in a lot of specific ways.
And you have to implement that policy.
And we have to implement that policy. That could either be done through a resolution or through an ordinance, depending on the best way to do that. There are a number of things we do either way.
Is there a positive or a negative to actually making it an ordinance? I mean, in city government, do you have a problem with ordinances or anything? Or
It's just a matter of case by case. Certain things we do by ordinance, certain by resolution. For example, our purchasing policy and our tax incentive policy right now is done by resolution.
Right.
Our garbage definition is done by ordinance. It's just a case-by-case thing. And we'll figure that out as we go forward.
The implementation.
I think that we probably are looking at an ordinance myself.
Okay. All right. Are we queued up again for the next segment? Okay. We have now a portion of discussion from various of the city council members this is after the public testimony.
Probably aren't here now, but we're on this council that were liberal that got Eddie's Bakery removed from Missoula because it made too much noise and we lost 100 good jobs. So I'll support anybody that wants to join a union, and I'll never cross the picket line. But I think that's the job to do, is organize, and if you offer them enough, they'll organize. I'm not going to organize for you.
Mr. Morgan.
I think the values and goals behind this effort are all goals that I'm in sympathy with and wish to work for.
Okay.
However, I don't think that I do not anticipate voting for any job creation programs as a function of the city government. Therefore, to expand the applications of this resolution tonight is something that I will vote against, at least when it's confined to the tax incentive programs. That's something that we have experience with, and it is well defined in state law. The hypothetical subsidies are something that we have no experience with whatsoever. I don't believe that the city government has any experience with them, certainly not in the time that I've been in the government, and I haven't heard of any experience prior to that anyone has passed on as by way of wisdom and useful knowledge to me. So this expansion is something that I'll oppose.
Mrs. Herbig?
Yes, I will speak in favor of the amendment. I feel that it's an attempt to take away the vagueness, and in fact, I don't think that that word even applies. I think even this resolution is weak in itself, but at least it's a start. And if we leave it without this amendment, then it's even weaker. And eventually, I would personally like to see us do away with the tax incentive fund, but we still have it, so we will have CDBG funds coming in, $650,000, I believe, annually. I think that needs to be taken into consideration. So I will support your amendment, Jim.
Mr. Sponseller.
Yes, I'd like to speak in favor of the amendment.
We were really glad that your amendment passed. It was pretty touch and go there for a while. I think I spent a good portion of that hour holding my breath waiting for the votes to happen. Jim, why do you think that the Chamber of Commerce didn't join the coalition and, in essence, kept quiet about their viewpoint? There was no organized, no organized opposition. Why do you think that was?
Well, actually, I did speak to the Chamber of Commerce a couple of weeks before that, and the Chamber members seem to have a lot of fear and a lot of confusion about what we were talking about. And when I was able to talk to them and explain what we were up to, they seemed okay. But I think that they they had a lot of fear and uncertainty. One chamber member asked me a question about well, how could he compete in the global market if he had to pay living wages? And I turned the question back around and said, well, you're a taxpayer. Mm-hmm. Do you want your taxes to subsidize people that then have to come back to the government and ask for help? And he didn't think that was a good idea. And then I said, okay, given that, let's talk about competition. You're competing with, for example, slave labor in China, where they don't care about how much they pay their people, and you do. So, I mean, there's some areas where they understood what, in a very straightforward manner what we were talking about. But I think, unfortunately, it's the kind of thing where a lot of people have said a lot of wild and insightful things about what we're up to. I mean, I specifically said on the floor, we don't have a hidden agenda. We were accused of having a hidden agenda. The open agenda is, let's have good-paying jobs for our people in our community, and I don't think anybody disagrees with that.
Mm-hmm. No. Mm-hmm. There seems to be a lot of confusion, and I know as we met with all of the city council members, and we did make a concentrated effort to do that with each and every person, Larry Anderson was one of the biggest opponents, and he kept talking about how he couldn't pay his workers a living wage and still be able to offer his goods at a price that we could afford to pay. And I don't know if he gets subsidies from the city, but many of the people that were being more vocal about it were not understanding what we were wanting. And I think Jamie Carpenter's, my Grant Creek people, business owners that aren't here tonight, we'll mention that later perhaps, but I think that's a lot of the same kind of problem.
Right.
So
that was pretty interesting during the actual council meeting. One of the members from the council said that he sees the same faces out in the audience all the time, and we're the same people that are going after the trees or whatever, and almost said that it was Eddie's Bakery moved out of town because of citizen protest, and I was like, wait, I don't know. So yeah, that was a difficult thing. And then also we had one person say that her constituency couldn't show up that night because they were hard at work, and that brought a great big harumph out of the audience, for which
many of us who were there are her constituency.
So anyway, there was some opposition from the city council, but as you are going to see in this next segment coming from the tape, that we've got the vote, and we have some of Mayor Cadis's good words about the vote here. So, are we ready to roll on that tape? Okay.
On Mr. McGrath's amendment, Crowley?
Yes.
Gingarelli?
No.
Harmon,
Yes.
Herbig,
Yes.
McGrath,
Yes.
Morgan,
No.
Reedy,
No.
Sponseller,
Aye.
Turek,
No.
Carpenter.
No.
Would anyone like to change their vote? Five ayes, 5 nays.
Mr. Harmon's very good counter. Let me explain my vote then. First of all, I disagree with the description that if we just apply this to tax incentives, it means nothing. I do not believe that is accurate. Second, in defense of the amendment, I think that because it is drawn narrowly, because it applies to it limits the scope of the subsidies to job creation, and it requires council approval, that I think with that kind of narrowing, it's something that I can go ahead and accept, knowing that any expansion of the livable wage notion will require direct action by the council, and we will debate that on an individual basis as those types of things come before us. And so I will vote aye. The motion carries. Mr. McGrath?
Okay, Mr. McGrath, motion carried, huh? Yeah,
That's good.
yeah, and a tiebreaker by Mayor Kato.
And I appreciate his vote in that case.
Yeah, yeah. I want to get a little bit into economic development.
Okay.
Future plans, economic development because one of our council members mentioned that this is a very small portion. This was only Appendix D. This is a small part of the big picture.
Sure.
So can you kind of give us an idea what the city council has mulled around for economic development for Missoula?
Sure, and I think part of what's at stake in this whole discussion is a definition of what economic development is, or what it means. And to me, if economic development isn't about what people bring home and can spend in their households, I don't know what it's about. But other people, I think, historically, in the last 20 years or so, have thought of economic development in terms of some sort of mystical business creation without any concept of how people get paid out of that. And to me, it's what people get paid at the end. And so we've confronted the fact that while there is not a lot of unemployment in Missoula, there's very low wages, and we need to address that.
Right.
We want to take some active steps. In the next fiscal year, we will begin to have $600,000 a year plus from the federal government given to us in block grant money, among other things, that we can use for housing, infrastructure development, and economic development. And we want to look at what we can do creatively with that to create some good paying jobs in our community. And we've just begun, in a sense, that planning and that discussion and what we might be able to do with that. What we wanted to do last Monday was say, here are the ground rules. Here's what we want to try to achieve with that. If we're going to invest money in a business, let's do it to get good paying jobs.
What are CDBG?
Community Development Block Grant money
is that what that
is it's part of the Housing and Urban Development, or HUD funds, from the federal government. And since we're now a community that's called an entitlement community, we're over 50,000 population, we get each year a certain amount of money, $600,000. In the past, we were able to apply for that as a grant, and we've done that over the years, particularly well for housing.
And what is Title I? What's Title I?
Title I funds is an older form of that kind of funds that then has cycled back into the community in loans that have been repaid. The largest ones were from what is now the Holiday Inn, I believe it was a Sheraton at the time, and Circle Square, which is a office building downtown. Those monies also are devoted to low and moderate income, to serve low and moderate income populations. We have about a $500,000 plus in the bank of that, which we are able to decide what we want to do with. And so we're in the position now to make some decisions about how do we want to invest those money in the community? What can we get out of that? And I think we're able at this point to think about some really creative and dynamic ways that we can do that. But it won't be a situation, I hope, where, as it has been in the past, where we simply give it to a company and they then do what they will with it and then maybe move to China.
Anita, I've been kind of hogging the questions here. You want to?
I just want to say that, you know, I really appreciate you looking at that, because businesses that pay low poverty level wages don't need any incentive to come here. We have hundreds of jobs in that that kind of category, and those businesses are creating more poverty for the city because they are double dipping, as one of the testifiers said. You're subsidizing the citizens as well because those businesses are paying poverty wages.
There was a comment saying that a lot of the small business owners are afraid. In my mind, if I was a small business owner, I would certainly want you to take hold of that money you gave to the, because that's coming out of my pocket in a sense, because I'm paying full taxes. You're not, as the person that's being subsidized. So I'm the one that's ending up losing, and I would definitely be on your side. I don't know, maybe my economics is not as good as what it should be, but it seems like, you know. So anyway, we have another piece of the tape queued up here. Let's see, this is the City Council wrap on this. There's some interesting comments here from one of the council members, Andy Sponsor, on the housing. And one of the reasons why we're having to do this, there's some interesting figures that he gave on how much it costs us to either own a home or rent an apartment.
I'd just like to speak for a moment about some figures that I saw, and I passed out a piece of paper from the Missoula Housing Authority earlier this week to all you folks, and I'll just take a moment to repeat some of that. In the last 10 years in this community, 59% of the jobs that have been created pay less than $17,000 a year. The cost of an average home in Missoula requires a $42,000 income. If you want to rent the average one-bedroom apartment in Missoula, you need to make $19,000 a year, and that's if you commit 30% of your income to rent and utilities. You know, I think we can split a lot of hairs about whether or not this is fully developed yet, but what it really amounts to is a value statement. We've got a crisis in this town, and it's something that needs our attention. And quite frankly, I'm here to say that I think we need to make this value statement now, and if there's more work to do, which there is, then we need to do that. I think when, you know, if you think poor and you talk poor and you act poor, you're going to be poor. And it's time for us to look around and make an effort to raise each other up. We'll raise ourselves up in the process. And this is a value statement that will do, in fact, just that. I say it's a little disingenuous to say that folks should get out there and organize themselves. And there's a lot of employers that are in western Montana that are extremely hard on their employees. They know that there's lots of folks in line for substandard wage jobs, and if you don't like the way they're running the show, you can hit the road. So to say that those folks should pull themselves up by the bootstraps and organize themselves when in fact their employers are intimidating them and thwarting their efforts every step of the way to organize, I think it's a little disingenuous. And I think that this resolution makes our policy firm about union busting and thwarting the attempts of people to organize. So I'll be voting for the main motion, and I would encourage my associates to do so as well.
Further discussion? Mrs. Herbig.
Well, earlier, there was a statement made that possibly we should wait for a state to do something, federal government to do something. It seems to me that if we're true leaders, we should start right here locally and not wait for federal government, state government to tell us what to do. And I think business needs to realize that if they're going to get good, reliable people who aren't always shifting jobs, then they're going to have to pay for them to work. The ones that are not making good wage are definitely going to be looking around to see if they can't better themselves. And I know that there are people, they say that we'll get more training. There are a lot of people out there making just poverty wages when they have degrees. And it's not right. And I've been there. I've been, before getting married umpteen years ago, I worked at a very low wage and worked darn hard. And it was good, hard physical labor. And at that time, at least living quarters was cheaper. So I fared better than what people are doing right now.
Further discussion? Seeing none, we'll have a roll call vote on the main motion.
On the resolution as amended, Harmon.
Aye.
Herbig.
Aye.
McGrath.
Yes.
Morgan.
No.
Reedy.
No.
Sponseller.
Aye.
Turek.
No.
Carpenter.
No.
Crowley.
Yes.
Gingarelli.
No.
5 ayes, 5 nays. 0 abstentions, 2 absent.
What I would like to say is to the folks in the audience, if not for a couple of absentees tonight, this would have gone down in the current form. I frankly don't believe there's a great deal of difference between what was proposed and initially and what we have here. And it concerns me that we go to 5-5 ties with some acrimony, at least not too much, and I want to compliment the council on that, over kind of the distance that separates the two sides here. But I hope that you all keep in mind the closeness of this and have listened carefully to what the opponents have had to say and incorporate that in your thinking as you work in the future on this issue. And obviously there is much work to be done. I think that's part of the problem, that we're trying to do it in bites rather than deal with the whole thing at once. But this obviously has a long ways to go. We need to work at listening to each other and working together on it. I will vote yes. We will move this on to the next step with that. I'm going to call a recess.
Okay, the good words of wisdom from Mayor Cadis there. We have a lot of work to do. We have a lot of definitions. We've got to actually put it into action. As we all know in life, the proof is in the pudding.
Yep.
So, is it pudding or pudding? I don't know. There were 2 city council members that were noticeably absent. Mayor Cadis points this out. They were 2 opposing members. Tell us, is there any way that this is going to come up again in the city council? Are we going to have to go through this process again?
Well, when it left committee, we had all of the council members in that committee, and it was tied at 6-6. So I did anticipate the mayor having to weigh in on this and did talk with him about it. Council members Gingarelli and Morgan, Gingarelli was supportive in committee all the way to the floor and then changed at that time. Councilmember Morgan testified on the floor, and I think in some of the clips tonight, that he sort of agrees with it in spirit and in intent, but
he likes to have a more fine line.
He wanted to see it sort of unfold, and I think the phase at which we're at, where we will be getting down to the details, the proof of, in the pudding, if you will, and being more specific, and simply also having time and having the ability for the entire community to discuss it more slowly, I think will bring several of those folks along. So I think that we're in good shape, much more than
There wasn't well, the Missoulian this morning in that paper didn't give the citizens much of an idea on the actual resolution of this from our standpoint, that this is here. It's congratulations. I want to move this on to the state level a little bit. As far as I heard mention that state tax incentives might be voted down. I want to know a little bit about the state economic development plan. I had heard that tourism was the top economic development plan. So I want to kind of move this a little bit on now to state.
And there's a living wage proposal at the state level.
Yes. There's a hearing on a living wage, statewide living wage proposal tomorrow at 10 o'clock, and we are
In
MPA
Helena.
In Helena.
Yeah.
MPA is taking a delegation to be at that hearing. We have also been very much involved with any of the appropriations committee hearings and anything having to do with economic development in the state level, pretty much sending the same message to the state that we've been promoting here in the city. It's going to be very exciting to go tomorrow and be able to say that Missoula is leading the state and actually a forerunner in the nation. And we do have a resolution, and I'm really proud of us for doing that, and very, very excited to be able to say that, you know, Missoula is here. We've, if I may say, doing the right thing.
I actually didn't know if we we did have one title showing up there, or had it prepared to show the other cities that actually passed an ordinance, and we are tiny in comparison to the rest. But
Yes.
this is our value.
We may be tiny in number, but we're big in spirit. And
Right, there you go. So read, I said down the bottom it says Missoula, Montana, here we come.
Yes.
All right, thank you for that. Also, one of the things that we're going to have to work on here at the local level is the actual dollar figures. I don't know if there's something up there on the titler also as from the job gap study. Anita, you might want to talk a little bit about that job gap study.
Well, basically, it was a study done by the Northwest Federation of Community Organizations and the Northwest Policy Center. And it was a study that was specific to our area. And
there were some figures that were just up on
Great.
up on the screen there.
And
they didn't take into consideration though our
You
high
have it
cost
on
of
the-
housing.
Right. The cost of housing and utilities, a lot of the people that we have shown this study to in some of our meetings have said that they're actually quite low. Housing and utilities for a household of one, we have at $357 a month. Household of two is $467. Jim, I think you know that it's really hard to find a place in Missoula that.
5.5, yeah.
Yeah. So.
And actually, Andy Sponsoler's testimony was pretty much right on that.
Yes.
Okay, we're just about ready to wrap up our show here. Be my Valentine. Yeah. Thanks to MCAT and their staff for letting Centered to the Left. That's our group that came out here tonight to actually participate in this community process television. And we encourage all the citizens of Missoula to come down and use MCAT. It's been fun doing these. No matter how you feel about this issue, and we urged you the last time that we were talking about this job study and the living wage, no matter how you feel, call your city council people. We probably had the information up on the titler before as to who your city council people are. If you do not know who your city council people are, you can call Montana People's Action, and I'll be giving you that number in a little bit. Montana People's Action, of which I am a member and Anita is a member, is a grassroots statewide citizen action organization.
and we tackle social and economic issues identified by low and moderate income members. Yeah. Okay, we have local membership chapters in Billings, Bozeman, and Missoula. And if you want to call and become a member of Montana People's Action, our Missoula office is 728-5297. That's 728-5297. We're still showing ward members up there, and that's great. You got the number for Montana People's Action, 728-5297. We have a lot of work to do. It was a short list of a long list, as Scott Morgan said the other night. We need to know what we can do more as citizens involved in our governmental process. We need to find out, especially from people who run it. You know?
This has been an astounding experience for me, the amount of involvement and the caliber of involvement, and I would just say keep up the good work. I mean, we will be talking about this as we go forward in committees and ironing out details. We'll have public, always public opportunities for people to weigh in, and I think particularly the things that have been helpful are the one-on-one discussions, whether by phone or with meetings or in other forums. And I think we need to explore opportunities to sit down with businessmen and others that are maybe concerned, but good-hearted taxpayers that want to do the right thing by their community,
and also express
and
their
learn
opinion.
more and have that
Open
dialogue.
the dialogue. Keep the dialogue coming. Okay, we want to thank our guests here tonight, all of us, the members of Senator to the Left. This is Jim McGrath, City Council member from Ward 2, and Anita Anderson from Montana People's Action, the Vice Chair for the state. And a big special Valentine's to everyone out there.
That's right.
I don't.
Thank you, people.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
If you're not watching on Valentine's Day, we do have a rerun of this program on Thursdays. Our next show will feature more information on the Y2K and what we need. And our director tonight, Rick, is going to actually host that program for us next week. We are here on Sundays at 8 o'clock and on Thursdays at 11. So good night to everyone. Thanks, Missoula.
Thank you, Virgin.
Oh, there's our crew members. Virginia, that's me, director.
welcome to Senator to the Left. Once again, here on Sunday nights at 8 o'clock, and we rebroadcast Monday at 5:30 p.m. It's the voice of the progressive community around Missoula. And we've had lots of shows now on lots of different subjects. We're now in our second season. You might have joined us on the solstice when we had a show welcoming the new light. And last week we had some show on Free Tibet, the issue that's on the minds of many people, how China has taken over Tibet. And we had the creators of a new movie called Wind Horse out there. So tonight with us is Bob Clark of the Alliance for the Wild Rockies, and we'll be talking about the Northern Rocky Mountain Ecosystem Protection Act, among other issues. And I hope you also can join us next week when we talk about some transportation issues around Missoula. So welcome to the show, Bob. How's things going?
Thank you, Billy. They're going real well. Can't complain. The Northern Rockies Ecosystem Protection Act, which we sometimes call NREPA, was introduced into Congress on February 2nd of 1999, and we are actively pursuing co-sponsors in the House of Representatives in Washington, D.C. We now have 30.
Well, that's great. Well, why don't we back up a little bit and tell us a little bit about your group and what you do in this group. What is the Alliance for the Wild Rockies?
We're a nonprofit grassroots conservation group, and we work on public lands management issues. Anything from timber sales to mining activities, water quality issues. We've kind of taken the grizzly bear and the bull trout and used those two species as kind of an indicator to how the ecosystem in the Northern Rocky Mountains is doing. And if those species are doing well, then the ecosystem is doing well. If those species are not doing well, which they are not, that means that we're doing something wrong to the land. So that we can kind of use that as, sort of, like something to gauge what we're doing as far as our activities on the land. So we work a lot in management issues.
Yeah, a lot of people have been talking about the grizzly bear. Could you describe what you're looking for from people throw around the concept grizzly bear restoration? I mean, what are you going to do to restore grizzly bears? What's the long-term plan here? What's your goals?
I think the key is habitat protection. And really what we talk about is critical habitat, and this is habitat that's crucial for the grizzly bear. We can't have island populations of grizzly bears in the Northern Rockies and expect them to do well. And I'd like to refer to the map if I could, and I could show exactly the areas that I'm talking about. Over here on this map, the Yellowstone area would be down here, and there is a population of grizzly bears in that area, and then up in the northern Continental Divide, which we call Bob Marshall and Glacier area, there's population up there. So we've got these two island populations with no way for the bears to really exchange genetically, and the biologists feel that that's really not going to be good in the long term for grizzly bears. So we need to not only secure the habitat in those areas, but we need to allow those animals to exchange back and forth from these core areas. So the habitat is really at the base of the issue with the grizzly bear and a lot of other animals too.
So people have been talking a lot about the Salmon Selway area. Perhaps we'll point that out in a second. But there's a lot of controversy over introducing grizzly bears again into the Salmon Selway area of Idaho. Could you talk a little bit about that? What's going on there?
Yeah, this was a mandate from the Endangered Species Act, which basically says that not only does the government have to identify species that are in trouble, but they also have to do something to try to recover them. Mm-hmm. So that when you look at a species like the grizzly bear, which needs a fairly large area, and you want to start a new population, or you want to encourage growth of that population so that we can take them off the endangered species list, we need to find suitable habitat, and the salmon-selway area is the largest intact ecosystem left in the lower 48. And so it's a natural thing to want to put bears in that area, and it's a large area that can sustain bears. So this is the area that the government has focused on to reintroduce grizzly bears and to try to get another population going to bring their overall numbers up in the lower 48.
Yeah, it's my understanding that Conrad Burns, our senator, first disagreed that the salmon-selway was suitable and called for some sort of study. What's the deal with that study? I've heard two sides to that, that it is suitable, there's enough food for them there, and he's saying that it's not enough.
The original report out of that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service did state that there was suitable habitat for grizzly bears in the salmon-selway, and Conrad Burns didn't like that. He thought that there probably wasn't good enough habitat, and I think there's some folks down in the local areas that were saying the same thing. So he secured funds to have a study done, another study done, to try to either back up or refute these reports of the habitat. And what this report ended up saying was that, yes, there is good habitat, and grizzly bears can survive and do fairly well in the salmon-selway area. And this wasn't too much to the senator's liking. So at first he said that second report, which was done by a guy named Mark Boyce out of Wisconsin, he didn't like the report, but there was something else in the report which mentioned that grizzly bears probably have a 1 in a million chance of going extinct in the lower 48. And he liked that, and that means that there's not much of a chance that grizzly bears will go extinct, so we don't need to do all of this hoopla and jumping through hoops to protect their habitat. This study says that everything's going to be fine.
But wasn't that 1 in a million chance actually just referring to something very specific and not really to the overall picture?
There was some problems with the study of how that came about being based on, and one of them was that it didn't take into account habitat changing. And we know that in 50 to 100 years, the habitat is going to change considerably in this area. I mean, we're probably going to have 4, possibly 6-lane highways from Whitefish to Hamilton. So we can't use a study that doesn't use changing habitat. We're also going to have more encroachment on our roadless areas, and we need to take those types of things into consideration,
Well, we're going to have a video here talking about the Northern Rocky Mountain Ecosystem Protection Act. But before we do, I guess we want to go briefly and talk about 2 other issues. There's a lot of controversy happening now about off-road vehicles. You want to speak to that just briefly, Bob?
Yeah, I will. There's a proposal, a 3-state proposal that is being presented to the people at this time, and it takes into consideration North and South Dakota and Montana, and this will be on agency lands, on Forest Service and BLM land. What they would like to do is to get a concrete proposal and then work it through an EIS and have some sort of set rules that where we can decipher where ORVs are supposed to be and where they're not supposed to be. So if we can get the address up on the screen at some point, and that will be the address to write your comments to. And we really need comments to be sent by May 31st. What we would like to see is to have the agencies prohibit ATVs, ORVs, OHVs, whatever we want to call them. We want them prohibited from definitely off of our roadless areas. And the proposal that they're putting out there does not do that right now. It doesn't do anything about protecting roadless areas. It actually gives the ORV users all the trails that presently exist, even the illegal ones. So we feel that it's a really bad proposal. We want people to write and to let the agencies know how they want their public lands to be managed in reference to ATVs. And there's a lot of effects that ATVs have on the land, and I won't go into that. But there's a definite conflict of users. When ATVs use an area, horse people and hikers often don't want to use that area because people don't like to recreate next to motorcycles.
Well, how about the animals? My gosh.
There's awful a lot of study that has been done that wildlife will be displaced by ATV and ORV use. So And then there's an erosion problem and noxious weeds being spread, and I think that that's something that needs to be addressed. So we need to tell the agencies that we really don't need to have ATVs on trails. We can have them on roads, which roads were built for motors, and trails were built for horses and for people. And so that if people want to comment by May 31st, that would be a really important thing to do. We feel that's a really good thing.
Well, yeah, that's great. Another issue that's been on people's minds is various mining proposals on the Rocky Mountain front. Now, if you're from Montana, you've probably been up along the front, and you know that it's one of the most beautiful areas we have. It's really majestic as you're coming from the east to the west. What's going on with these mining proposals on the Rocky Mountain front? Could you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yes. Forest Service Chief Mike Dombeck was recently in Missoula, and he went ahead and put a 2-year moratorium on hard rock mining in the Rocky Mountain front.
Sounds good.
Yeah, this is a good thing, but it is a temporary thing, and we really applaud Mike Dombeck for doing that. He really stepped out there and did the right thing. There apparently been a lot of mining claims. A certain individual has placed I think it was 150 mining claims on the Rocky Mountain front by one person. And whether these are bogus or legitimate is, really not the issue here. The problem is that this is going to escalate where we're going to need roads in here. We're going to have mining happening on the Rocky Mountain front. And it's just such a pristine area. It is the top 1% of wildlife habitat. And I really think it's important to have that area protected, keep its wild and roadless character. Sorry.
Well, that's, what can people do on that? Is there a place to write or call?
There is a place, and I think we can get that up on the screen. If not, we're going to roll it at the end of the show, I understand. And the forest supervisor at the Lewis and Clark National Forest would be the person to write to on that issue. And what they're doing is they're taking a scoping proposal right now for the 20-year plan. And this is something that we think is really important, because rather than relying on this 2-year moratorium, which is a temporary thing, we really need to get a more long-term plan. So a 20-year plan is where we're looking at, and we want to stop all mining and mining claims on the Rocky Mountain front for the next 20 years. And this will help to keep the wild character of this region, and also it keeps it in place for future wilderness designation, which is the real key here. Is if roads are allowed to be brought in and activities like mining are allowed there, in the future we'll have a hard time designating that area as wilderness, and it really needs to be protected as wilderness.
Well, let's go back to the topic of our show, the Northern Rocky Mountain Ecosystem Protection Act. We're going to, as I said, see a video here in just a minute or two. What is that? I mean, for our viewers that don't really know much about the environmental movement, could you describe this bill, what it would do in a very brief sense? And then I think the video will describe it a little bit more. So just...
Okay. The bill basically takes the 18 million acres of unprotected wilderness that we have out there. And these are areas that have not been logged or roaded as of yet, but they're still not protected as wilderness.
18 million acres,
these are national forest lands that are roadless. And roadless areas...
You're talking about Idaho, Montana, the country? What are you talking about?
It's a 5-state bill, and it does cover Montana, Wyoming, Idaho, and the eastern portions of Washington and Oregon.
Down in Hell's Canyon. There.
Right. And one of the biggest things that it does is takes these roadless areas that haven't been logged yet and are so really crucial to wildlife, and it protects them as wilderness. So we add 18 million acres of public lands to the wilderness preservation system. And it also, one of the great things it does that this map doesn't show is that there's 1,800 miles of wild and scenic river designations. And we think that's real important. It prevents dam building on rivers like the Yellowstone. So that's a really good thing for salmon and trout fisheries. So that's another thing. It also adds some national parks. These are study areas in Hell's Canyon, and the North Fork of the Flathead is another study area for NARIPA, and that would add those approximately 2 million acres of that. So we're looking at 20 million acres of public land in the Northern Rockies that'll be protected. There's also corridors, and that's a pretty important thing. The biologist that worked on this plan...
What do you mean by these corridors? What's
well,
a corridor?
these are areas that, let's say we've had these core ecosystems, and we call Yellowstone is an ecosystem, and then the salmon sellway over here in Idaho. And then up north, we've got Glacier and Bob Marshall. And like I talked about with the grizzly bears, and there needs to be ability for wildlife to exchange genetically. We've worked with the Craigheads and Chuck Jonkel and Lee Metzger, and these are really renowned biologists, wildlife biologists, and grizzly bear biologists. And they've said that if these animals, like grizzly bears, are going to prosper for the next 100 or so years, we need to put in place a corridor system so that wildlife can travel from one core ecosystem to another. So that ensures their long-term viability. We don't want to work on a 5 or 10-year plan. We want to work on a 100-year plan.
So does that mean no one can go into these corridors? What can happen in these corridors?
The corridors themselves will not, the activities will not be prohibited, but it will be limited, like logging and mining and road building. So it's not a shut out of the extractive industries in these corridors, but it will be limited. So there's going to be road density that's going to really stay down, probably below 0.25 definitely, so we can secure decent habitat for grizzly bears to travel. But the new wilderness areas, of course, will be managed as wilderness. So the corridors will have a lesser of a restrictions on them. There's still going to be some motorized use to be allowed in there, some logging, and some of these activities. So it's not a complete shutout. But it does need to have secure habitat. The corridors have been strategically placed in areas where there is the most public land, the most pristine public land. And that's the right path to take. Since this is a public lands bill, it doesn't really affect private lands at all. It's in Congress, so it's only what Congress can effectively mandate, which is public lands. So.
Well, one more question before we go into the video. There's clearly some opposition to this bill. Most of the Republicans don't seem to like it. From what you hear from the timber folks, they'd be shut out entirely. All the mills would close down. Is there any opportunity for these communities to continue to do some mining, some timber activities, grazing, etc.?
Well, I'll start on the first part of that, and we really feel the bill is a bipartisan bill. And we do have the lead sponsor on this bill is Christopher Shays, who's a Republican from Connecticut. And so we're really trying to make it an issue that it's for everybody in America, and whether you're Democrat or Republican, the environment is something that we really need to protect. So we're really trying hard to make it not be a Democrat-only bill. And I think we've been pretty successful at that. We've got a few Republicans that are on board. The second part of your question about job loss and issues like that, we've got these wildland recovery areas. And I can point them out on the map here. They're near Yellowstone. There's one by Lolo Pass, and then up near Libby, the Kootenai National Forest. These areas will be restored as closely as possible back to their original wild state. Now that's going to be difficult. We need to take a lot of roads out, and there's a lot of restoration, but that creates jobs. So this bill would create 2,300 jobs, regional jobs in the area. And these are good paying jobs. We have an economic report that was done that backs this up. So it's not only a bill that protects wilderness, which is a good thing, but it also creates jobs, and it allows people in local communities to still work in their communities without having to rely on, let's say, tourism jobs or something like that.
Okay, why don't we move into this video? Want to just give a brief description of what we're about to see here?
The video was produced, I believe, in 1994 by Greenfire Productions, and it really goes to great lengths to explain some of the reasons why conservationists are fighting so hard here in the Northern Rockies to protect the land. And I think the video really does a great job of showing that. It also explains NAREPA and how that is the solution for some of the problems that we've had recently.
Okay, is that video ready? Can we go on into it?
$100, 1 1/4, 1 1/2, 170. The last of the native forest. 3 3 1/4, 3 1/2, 375 4 4 1/4, 4 1/2, 4 75 5 5 1/4. The last wild ribbon. 3 1/4, 3 1/2, 375 and a 4, 4 1/4, 4 1/2 and a 475 and a 5 and a 5 and a quarter, 5 and a 5 and a 575 to 600, 6 1/4, 6 and a half, 6 the 75 and wilderness. 7. The dreams of our children, solitude, freedom, hope. Going once, going twice.
Only a few hundred years ago, wildlands reached from coast to coast and from the Arctic to the tropics. Wildlife roamed in abundance. Now the abundance is gone, the web of life torn. Extinction of species no longer is surprising news. Today, there is only one bioregion left in the lower 48 states where we still find virtually all native wildlife species, the wildlands of the northern Rocky Mountains. Vast stretches of undeveloped public land make the northern Rockies the last refuge for animals long gone from the rest of the country. Up to now, the region's wildness and remoteness has safeguarded these survivors from extinction.
According to a former chief of the U.S. Forest Service, that agency alone is destroying wilderness at the rate of about 1.5 million acres a year.
Maybe my well-being isn't the only well-being. Maybe I need to think about my grandchildren, other people's grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and generations down the road.
We've produced things like endangered grizzly bear populations and a whole array of endangered fish, birds, and mammals.
And you know dang well that the oil and the gas companies, respect is the least thing from their mind. They're destructive. They like to destroy things that are there just for greed. Yeah.
So if we are to harvest timber here, then we are going to have to move into roadless area.
Spanning 5 states and 2 Canadian provinces, the U.S. portion of the Northern Rockies Wildland Complex is composed of 5 greater ecosystems: the Cabinet Yaak Selkirk, the Glacier Continental Divide, Yellowstone, Salmon Selway, and the Hells Canyon Wallowa. These public lands are owned by all Americans and are managed by the U.S. Forest Service, Bureau of Land Management, and the National Park Service. Once an intact system, these public wildlands are rapidly shrinking and becoming more and more isolated from each other. Roading, logging, mining, oil and gas development, and livestock grazing are endangering these ecosystems. The habitat on which wildlife is so utterly dependent is being altered and tamed. Are we as a nation willing to save this last remnant of the real America? We Americans began protecting wildlands in the late 1800s when we made Yellowstone and Yosemite our first national parks, protected for the enjoyment and benefit of the American people. In the 1960s, the Wilderness Act initiated a new form of wildlands protection. In designated wilderness, humans are visitors who do not remain. Today, despite our conservation efforts, wildlife populations are declining and going extinct. Reed Noss, Science Director, the Wildlands Project.
One of the most alarming discoveries of the last few decades is that our existing national parks are simply not big enough to maintain populations of the larger animals, particularly the carnivores, such as wolverines, grizzly bears, wolves, even cougars and black bears in many cases. They're simply not large enough.
Historically, we designated national parks and wilderness areas with aesthetic and recreational values in mind. We granted protection for land with low or no commercial value, the high elevation areas, rocks, and ice. But we often did not protect the areas richest in biodiversity, the prime wildlife habitat. These lowlands were the first areas to be logged, grazed, dammed, mined, or otherwise exploited. With the resulting decline of wildlife populations, scientists began to recognize just how much habitat wildlife needs to survive. Derek Craighead, a biologist at the Craighead Institute, studies the habitat needs of grizzly bears.
The important thing that we learned is that the grizzly bear requires a whole and intact and healthy ecosystem, that we can't identify specific critical habitat and preserve it and expect to have the bear do well. We need to manage and protect the entire ecosystem because the bear uses it all, and all of it's important to the bear.
Historically, there were 100,000 grizzly bears throughout the West. In the lower 48 states today, we find them almost exclusively in the Northern Rockies. Less than 1,000 animals survive. And here, we have our best chance to recover a stable and healthy grizzly population. John Craighead has studied grizzly bears for over 35 years and has been deemed by the National Geographic Society as one of the top 10 scientists of the 20th century.
If we protect the grizzly bear, we're going to protect all of these, all the plants and animals that are essential to the grizzly bear, and in doing that we're going to protect a lot of species that are threatened and endangered now and will be in the future.
Grizzly bears are at the top of a complex food chain. If we protect the grizzly bear, we will automatically protect countless other species and an entire bioregion. Wolves are known to travel up to 550 miles. They don't recognize national park boundaries or international borders. Diane Boyd is a biologist who's been studying wolves for nearly 20 years.
We've got our wolves coming down from Canada, and they're spreading out in the peninsula down the Rocky Mountains. And it's important to keep that continuity from here. If we have packs in Yellowstone, say in southern Montana, and there's no way for those packs to get exchanged with the Canadian population, they're just not going to do very well.
She stresses that in addition to needing sufficient habitat, these magnificent animals also need our tolerance.
Because if you have one without the other, the wolves aren't going to make it. If you have habitat and people have archaic attitudes, the wolves won't be allowed to exist. And if you have great attitudes but no habitat, wolves get no place to live. So you need a combination of both.
Our success in recovering and sustaining healthy wildlife populations will depend more than anything else on the fate of our public lands. In the Northern Rockies, much of the public land remains in a wild condition, but is not protected. These lands are known as roadless areas. Forest Service plans to log in these roadless areas will fragment this critical wildlife habitat. When we break large areas of habitat into smaller and more isolated pieces, we fragment the homelands of wildlife. Conservation biologists warn that if we continue to fragment these roadless areas, we will bring disaster to the remaining wildlife populations.
When we fragment an area such as the Northern Rockies into a group of semi-isolated national parks, say, we can lose species within a matter of decades.
The American people and biologists that are working for the land management agencies in the U.S. Are making a serious mistake if they think that the Canadian side of the international ecosystems that we share are capable of providing grizzly bears to restock or augment bears on their side of the border, on the south side of the border. The degradation of ecosystems in Canada in many ways and in many cases is even more advanced than it is in the U.S.
Habitat fragmentation and degradation may already have proceeded to the point where this landscape cannot now support those animals indefinitely.
First thing we need to do is get away from these artificial boundaries that have constrained our vision, such as state lines, agency jurisdictional lines, national park boundaries, for example, and start to manage and zone the overall landscape in an ecologically intelligent manner, and see how we can connect the existing system of parks and other refuges into a network that will allow natural movements of animals from one area to another and provide enough total area for these populations to persist for a long time.
Wilderness is the endangered land that we must protect for our wildlife heritage. But under current Forest Service plans, these public lands are on the auction block.
They clear-cut everything right up to the borders of the park, as you know, and where they could use bulldozers, they did, or fire, and they burned what rubble is left. And the erosion from the rains is just, you know, scarred those slopes, those severe slopes where those marvelous, wonderful trees used to exist. If I had not been there myself and seen it, I would not have believed that an agency of the United States government could, you know, permit such an outrage to be perpetrated.
Exposure of the destruction of native forests in the Pacific Northwest has caused public outrage nationwide. The U.S. Forest Service has responded by promoting new approaches for land management. In a congressional hearing on the Northern Rockies, the Deputy Chief of the U.S. Forest Service states,
"The Chief of the Forest Service has stated that one of his primary goals is to quickly and effectively implement ecosystem management in the National Forest."
With the words ecosystem management, the Forest Service implies a change in their management approach. But among the first memos to the regional foresters regarding ecosystem management, the Chief of the Forest Service stated that unless roadless areas are removed from the timber base, you should proceed in an orderly fashion to enter more such areas. In the entire greater Salmon-Selway ecosystem, there are nearly 11 million acres of roadless areas, forming the largest unbroken temperate forest ecosystem left in the United States. Hundreds of timber sales are planned. Ed Wood of the Red River Ranger District talks about timber cutting plans.
In the recent past, almost none of it's come from roadless areas because we've been working in the Red River drainage here. But now we have cut about all we should in this Red River drainage, and we are moving into the roadless areas.
In the Red River District, there are 4 roadless areas. The largest 2 are Meadow Creek and Cove Mallard. The Forest Service is moving ahead to log these areas.
After Cove Mallard were cut, and it was planned to be cut in about 6 years, after that were cut, then we would either have to go into another roadless area or decrease our cut dramatically.
Al Espinosa worked as a fisheries biologist for 20 years with the Forest Service on the Clearwater National Forest in Idaho.
We've lost a lot of our stocks to dams, mining, grazing, logging, and road construction. I think the American Fisheries Society has established that we've lost about 106 of our native anadromous fish stocks to have gone extinct.
Espinosa says that in order to maintain and recover surviving fish populations, we have to protect the remaining roadless areas.
We have some tremendous fishery resources in these roadless watersheds, and they're pristine. These pristine watersheds can then be the anchor points for production of spring Chinook salmon, summer steelhead trout, bull trout, and west slope cutthroat trout. Unless we protect the best of what's available, we're not going to be able to hang on to some of these stocks.
Logging roads are at the crux of the issue. Many say that these roads cause the worst damage to an ecosystem. The Forest Service has built nearly 400,000 miles of roads in our national forests, 8 times the length of the interstate highway system. Keith Hammer is challenging this road building program.
And what their premise basically has been is that we can go ahead and build roads because we can have all the roads we want, they don't hurt wildlife that much, and we can mitigate the harm to wildlife or to fish or to water quality by putting some gates on some of the roads, as if somehow that makes the impacts go away.
Over the past 10 years, Keith has inventoried hundreds of miles of logging roads in the Flathead National Forest of Montana.
Well, what we have here is an example of a road that should have never been built in the first place. It's obviously built on the wrong kind of soils, and it's in pristine grizzly bear habitat.
20 years ago, the road above Dodge Creek collapsed and washed into the pristine creek, destroying one of the best bull trout fisheries in the Flathead.
This is supposed to be home for bull trout and grizzly bear, not a home for culverts and mudslides. It's that simple. And whenever the Forest Service or the timber industry try and convince you that they need roads to do ecosystem management, it's a lie. They need roads to haul trees out of places like this. It doesn't help the ecosystem in any way, shape, or form.
Vanishing forests, degraded fisheries, fragmented wildlife habitat. These tragedies concern all of us who look into the future. But Professor Thomas Power, chair of the Economics Department at the University of Montana, holds little hope that the Forest Service actually will change its practices.
The Forest Service, even with its new ecosystem management, is struggling to get the cuts back up to very high levels. Those levels of timber harvest are going to require a massive increase in the level of roading beyond the level that now makes the landscape a good part of western Montana, for instance, and eastern Washington and Oregon and northern Wyoming, central Idaho. Already makes them look like they're zigzag zippers spread across the hillside.
Most people do not realize that American tax dollars are subsidizing the destruction of our last wilderness. Billions of dollars are spent to administer timber sales and road building. Timber and mining corporations reap windfall profits. Little, if any, money reverts back to the public. The ecosystems stand in ruin.
Flood, famine, war, yes, then your whole environment has to change. There's nothing you can do about it. But in the interest of a few corporations taking chances, running roads in here, I don't think that this kind of living in this kind of country should be changed on their behalf. And I don't care how many government agencies sanction it. Meaning, of course, Forest Service, BLM.
The question that puzzles many is how we can have a viable economy and wildlands at the same time. The timber industry claims that protecting the remaining roadless areas will ruin our economy. Tom Power explains why this isn't so.
In a matter of 5 to 7 weeks, all of the timber jobs that might be associated with harvesting the trees on these roadless areas would be replaced simply with the normal expansion of the economies of the northern Rocky state. I simply would submit that that's a cost that this region can easily afford to pay, and that most of us would be happy to pay in order to grant permanent protection to 20 million acres of wildlands.
More and more people now believe that we are capable of adapting our industries to long-term survival of our wildlands, our forests.
We all need to, conserve and not squander the resources that we have, and particularly with timber, and look at alternative uses and alternative resources and alternative products that are out there and available now.
The Alliance for the Wild Rockies, a regional conservation group, is dedicated to protecting these wildlands and halting our economic suicide. Their executive director, Mike Bader, sums up why there is an urgent need for a new management plan for these public lands.
And the problem that we have today with our land management is that we're spending hundreds of millions of dollars to prevent the extinction of the Pacific salmon, the grizzly bear, the gray wolf, the woodland caribou, and on and on. But at exactly the same time, we're spending hundreds of millions of dollars subsidizing the destruction of their last remaining habitat, so that what we're actually doing is paying to destroy America's public lands. It doesn't make economic sense, it doesn't make environmental sense, it isn't saving our jobs, our wildlife, or our water. It doesn't make any sense at all.
The Alliance has put forth a scientifically and economically based citizen plan for protection of our public wildlands. The general concept has been introduced into Congress as the Northern Rockies Ecosystem Protection Act, also referred to as NREPA. This plan goes beyond borders to finally protect adequate wildlife habitat in the Northern Rockies. The basis for this concept is a network of inviolate core reserves. The backbone of the core reserves will be the existing national parks and already protected wilderness areas. Proposed new national parks would be added to the core reserves. The roadless areas that are so critical for wildlife would be designated as wilderness and added to the system. Degraded public lands that were once the most productive wildlife habitat would be designated as wildland recovery areas. Connective corridors would link these core reserves, allowing the natural movement of animals and plants across the landscape, ensuring genetic exchange between otherwise isolated populations. Public lands already impacted by resource extraction would be the buffer zones. Here, logging and other activities would take place only in a sustainable manner. The size of this wildlands complex would be large enough to sustain healthy populations of all native wildlife. Backed by people across the country, businesses, scientists, former President Jimmy Carter, and members of Congress, this wildlands proposal is charting a new course for conservation of public lands.
Just as importantly, it sets a global model for how people can live sustainably, and it allows people, or it preserves the chance for future generations to live in a world where they can have productive, positive lives and live in a world where natural functioning ecosystems continue to exist.
History has protected a good part of our natural environment. And that at least leaves the potential for a fairly attractive and positive economic future if we don't destroy the very source of our economic vitality by turning the extractive industries loose for one last binge.
Animals play a very large part in our ceremonies and our religion. Because we recognize the fact if it weren't for the animals, we wouldn't be where we're at today. They helped us survive. And we have to help them survive in return.
You know, there's a lot more people that are turning back to our old ways. And by turning back to our old ways, we're respecting everything around us, something that we almost lost, you know. I see a lot of hope in that.
I think it's important to realize that we simply have to protect wilderness if we're going to have wilderness on our public lands. We can't protect vast tracts of wilderness in Ohio and Indiana, which are almost entirely in private ownership. We can't protect large tracts of ecologically functioning wilderness in urbanized New Jersey or the greater Los Angeles area. But we can have real wilderness with grizzly bears and wolves and wildfires and living things evolving and interacting with each other in Idaho and Montana.
We look forward to this area being connected to the Bob Marshall and all the other habitat areas that are described under NREPA, so that it's a healthy place, not just for wildlife, but for people.
The fate of our wildlands is in our hands. Future generations are depending on us to take a new course in land conservation and protect this remnant of the real America.
Well, that was some really beautiful footage and some very enlightening footage. But I think a lot of people might still have some questions left as well. I know one of the things I hear a lot when I'm talking to folks about these type of issues, protecting our public lands, some folks come back at me and say, well, don't we have enough wilderness already? I mean, there's quite a few wilderness areas out there.
We've got some great wilderness areas. There's no question about that. We've got some really nice areas. The Bob Marshall, the Salmon Selway area has the Frank Church River of No Return and the Selway Bitterroot Wilderness. That comprises almost 4 million acres of wilderness right there. But still, we're looking at islands of wilderness, and we're losing this connection. Also, when you look at the national forest as a whole, there's 191 million acres of national forest lands out there in the United States. And presently, we've protected as wilderness 1/6 of that. So that's really not much of a balance. We've got 1/6 of our national forest protected. We've already developed over half. The graph that's on the screen right now, it's a pie chart, shows the red area is the areas that have already been logged, developed, roaded, mined, and already lost. So we see that we've already developed over half. We've got 1/6 that's been protected, and we've got a little bit over that, about 1/5 that is still unprotected, but just as wild as those wilderness areas. And we need to bring, these are the roadless areas that people talk about. A lot of people talk about roadless areas. These are the areas that we really need to bring into the wilderness preservation system so that we can see from the pie chart that there really needs to be more of a balance shift towards more wilderness.
Well, I'm a little bit confused on this because I keep hearing that we only have maybe 5 or 10% of our original forests left. What's going on with that?
Well, this pie chart only uses national forests, and if we brought into this pie chart like BLM lands and other public lands, that percentage of wilderness would shrink considerably because we don't have a lot of BLM, wilderness designated.
Yeah, and I guess there's quite a bit of land out there owned by the timber corporations as well, and some by the state, so I guess I see where you're coming from. Now, what type of recreation opportunities is this plan going to provide for the general public?
I think that really the people will benefit from it, and just to put out a few recreation opportunities, we can talk about hunting, and I think there's no question that when we have large areas of secure habitat, we have really good wildlife, and when we have good wildlife populations, we've got some great hunting opportunities, and we can bring in fishing to that, and I think that it enhances fishing. So when we're protecting these watersheds, we have intact, clean watersheds that can produce really good fish populations, so that would enhance fishing. So there's going to be no change to the existing opportunities that people now enjoy on public lands, especially wilderness areas like hunting and fishing and hiking, mountain climbing. The areas, the types of things that won't be allowed are the same types that aren't allowed now. Motorized recreation. So there's really not a big change between what people can enjoy. This term, and you hear this a lot where people talk about locking up the land. And I've heard this term a lot, and it really bothers me because I don't want to be perceived as the type of person that's locking up land. And I don't think that that's what it does, because as citizens, we can still access that land. So it's not locked up. What we're doing is that we're keeping the corporations out. We're keeping the timber industry, the mining industry, we're keeping the people's vehicles out, but we're not keeping people out.
So
I think that's a key.
So there's nowhere on this whole area we're talking about that citizens actually could not go?
Nope.
This sounds, really interesting, sounds incredible. It's not real clear to me, is this going to cost us a lot? It sounds like, it's going to be a huge endeavor. It's going to be pretty expensive to make this all happen.
It's a large 5-state wilderness bill, but if it's implemented, it'll actually save money. And the economic report that we had done through Michael Garrity, through the University of Utah, says that the taxpayer is going to save $100 million in the first 10 years of implementation of NREPA. And this is done through stopping the subsidized logging activities in our roadless areas, so that when we log in roadless areas, the taxpayer is actually footing the bill to log into these areas, because we have to pay for the roads to go into there. We have to pay for the trees to be marked. We have to pay for all the Forest Service employees to do that timber sale. So when it's all said and done, the public loses when we log roadless areas. A good example of that is the Tongass National Forest in Alaska. And I know it doesn't relate to the Northern Rockies, but they're always, the Tongass is almost all roadless area logging, and they lost $30 million in 1997 logging the Tongass. So that we can see that when we log roadless areas, we're costing tax dollars. So if we stop doing that, which is what NREPA does, we'll actually be saving taxpayers a lot of money, and we'll be saving our wildlife and our wild heritage at the same time. So I think it's really a triple plus.
So you're saying we're saving money in this. Not completely clear on this. How about what's going to happen with the road system? Is that part of the reason why it costs us so much money to make this all happen? It costs money to keep the roads and put them in there. I've been hearing it costs a lot of money to maintain them as well. So is that part of our savings then?
Oh, definitely. When you look down the road, especially on the 10-year plan where they have done that with the savings, a lot of that is road maintenance also. So we can save money by not building them in the first place. Then we're going to save money by not maintaining the roads that we haven't built. So there's a savings there on the roads, but I think that it goes beyond that too. The government spends money, marking these timber sales, and that's a savings that we won't have to spend. And there's also a lot of litigation that comes along with these controversial timber sales, and the government has to pay to, protect their side. So if there's not this litigation going on between environmental groups, if they're not going to log in these roadless areas, we're going to save a little bit of money. A certain percentage of what the Forest Service loses is paid on litigation to try to further these timber sales. So we can stop all of that and save the American public a load of money.
So let's touch a little bit back on the grizzly bears before we sort of have to close up here. Part of the reason to have this plan in place is to protect the grizzly bear. Now, what is their population now? Is it stable, declining, and what chances, if this bill is passed, what do you say the chances are that the grizzly bear would survive and would be stable?
Well, I think, you know, to just throw out a round number, in the lower 48, we're looking at probably about 800 grizzly bears from what we understand, and that's, you know, give or take 100 or two. We think that the population is definitely not rising. It's either stable or slowly declining, and a lot of that is due to habitat loss and more contact with humans. In order to protect the bear and have them increase their numbers, there's no question, I don't think any biologist would say that if we implemented NARIPA, the grizzly bear populations would greatly increase. We've got all this land protected. We've got corridors for them to migrate from one core ecosystem to another. So I really feel that it's going to help the grizzly bear a lot.
So what can we do? What can the public do?
NARIPA is in Congress right now. You can write to your representative, and we've got the number up on the screen right below me, yeah. I believe. And if you happen to be watching this from your dorm room, or you just got to town and maybe you're not registered in Montana, you're from Utah or from Colorado or somewhere else, write your representative back in the state that you might be from, or if you have a connection with another representative. We need to get as many Congress people on board this bill, so I encourage everyone to write.
So how about if people need more information, can they go ahead and contact you all at the Alliance for the Wild Rockies?
Right.
I assume that you'd love to have people hear from you, and also if people do want to get involved with the Alliance for the Wild Rockies, I assume they can call or write. And any last words on that?
Yeah, we definitely encourage people, if they have questions about this bill, definitely give us a call, write us. So we've got the number up there, and I also have an email. I don't know if that's on the screen, but this is we're not hiding anything. We want the public to be involved in this, and so we really encourage people to give us a call, and if you have any questions, we'll get you to literature.
Thank you once again, Bob, and thank the public for joining us tonight, and we'll have some more shows for you. Join us Sundays at 8 o'clock and Monday at 5:30 for our rebroadcast. Have a good night.
Yeah, I know.